Happy Sunday, everybody. I'm Dr. Gregory, and you're watching Dr. Gregory's Meta Moments. This is episode 16. I decided I'm going to keep going with the biology of belief. I'm really excited about how much information it's offering to my patients and to the audience, and I've been getting such incredible feedback about it. I'm going to delve into chapter 5. Last week, we talked about how chemical and energetic signals have a varying impact on the human body. And although we still use chemical signals, including pharmaceuticals or hormones in our body like estrogen and progesterone, etc., we actually have a far more affinity to using energetic signals to affect the behavior of our bodily cells. And the reason is because energetic signals have a much greater affinity, or efficiency, I should say, because the signal travels much faster, such as in the speed of light, as opposed to a chemical signal, which could take minutes or maybe even hours to diffuse along a series of cells to be able to react to that particular signal. So the fact is that harnessing the power of your mind can be more effective than the drugs you've been programmed to believe that you need. Research that he discussed in the last chapter found that energy is a more efficient means of affecting matter rather than chemicals. Unfortunately, scientists most often deny rather than embrace these sorts of exceptions. His favorite example is the scientific denial of the reality of the mind-body interaction as relating to an article that appeared in Science magazine about 19th century German physician Robert Koch, who along with Louis Pasteur, otherwise known as pasteurized milk, founded the germ theory. The germ theory holds that bacteria and viruses are now the primary cause of disease. A modified version of that theory is widely accepted now, but in Koch's day, it was much more controversial. One of Koch's critics was so convinced that the germ theory was wrong, he brazenly wolfed down a glass of water laced with Vibrio cholerae, which is the bacterium that Koch believed to cause cholera. Cholera is a very deadly disease that can cause severe diarrhea and electrolyte loss and can be found in countries such as India. So, to everyone's astonishment, the man was completely unaffected by the virulent pathogen. The Science article published in 2000 describes the incident and stated, for unexplained reasons, he remains symptom-free, but nevertheless incorrect. Interesting. The man survived, and science, reflecting the unanimity of opinion on the germ theory, had the audacity to say that his criticism was incorrect. If it's claimed that this bacterium is the cause of cholera and the man demonstrates that he's unaffected by the germs, how can he be incorrect? Instead of trying to figure out how the man avoided the dreaded disease, scientists blithely just dismissed this and other embarrassing, messy exceptions that spoil their theories. Remember the dogma that genes control biology? Do you remember that dogma? Well, here's another example in which scientists who are bent on establishing the validity of their truth ignore pesky exceptions. The problem is there cannot be exceptions to a theory. Exceptions simply mean that the theory is not fully correct. So, similarly, science is unambiguous about its claim that HIV, the virus, causes AIDS, but it has no conception as to why there are large numbers of individuals that have been infected with the virus for decades, but they do not express the disease. Interesting, right? Many people have been infected with this particular virus, yet they exhibit no signs or symptoms of the disease, AIDS, or HIV positivity. More baffling is the reality of terminal cancer patients who've recovered their lives through spontaneous remissions. Because such remissions are outside the bounds of conventional theory, science completely disregards the fact that they ever happened. Spontaneous remissions are dismissed as unexplainable exceptions to our current truths or simply misdiagnoses. Yet there are a tremendous number of examples of these spontaneous remissions of deadly diseases, including cancer, and I'd love to give you a great example of that. Her name is Anita Moorjani, and she actually wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. She's also stood in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people, telling her story of her spontaneous cancer remission, and she's been interviewed by Dr. Wayne Dyer, but I highly suggest you look into Anita Moorjani and her story because it is absolutely incredible. Okay, let's go on. When positive thinking goes bad, this is the next excerpt of the chapter. Before I go on to discuss the incredible power of our minds and how much my research on cells provided insight to how the body's mind-body pathways work, I need to make it very clear, I do not believe that thinking positive alone always leads to physical cures. You need much more than just positive thinking to harness control of your body and your life. It's important for our health and well-being to shift our mind's energy towards positive, life-generating thoughts and eliminate ever-present, energy-draining, and debilitating negative thoughts. But I mean that in the biggest sense of but. The mere thinking of positive thoughts will not necessarily have any impact on our lives at all. In fact, sometimes people who, quote, flunk positive thinking become more debilitated because now they think their situation is hopeless and they believe they have exhausted all the mind-body remedies. That's unfortunate though. What those positive thinking dropouts haven't understood though is that the seemingly separate subdivisions of the mind, the conscious and the subconscious, are actually very interdependent. The conscious mind represents the seat of our personal identity, source, or spirit. It's the creative mind. It can see into the future, it can review the past, or it can disconnect from the present moment as it solves problems in our head. In its creative capacity, the conscious mind holds our wishes, desires, and aspirations for our lives, and it is the mind that conjures up our positive thoughts. In contrast, the subconscious mind is primarily a repository of a stimulus response tape derived from instincts as well as learned experiences. Keep that in mind. The subconscious mind is fundamentally habitual. It will play the same behavioral responses to life signals over and over again, much to our chagrin. How many times have you found yourself going ballistic over something trivial like an open toothpaste tube? You've been trained since childhood to carefully replace the cap. When you find the tube with its cap left open, your buttons are pushed, right? And you automatically fly into a rage. You could apply this to any minor situation that happens, whatever triggers you, that it isn't fundamentally important in life, but yet it triggers you to that degree. You've just experienced the simple stimulus response behavior program stored in your subconscious mind. That's where it comes from. When it comes to sheer neurologic processing abilities, the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 more times powerful than the conscious mind. If the desires of the conscious mind conflict with the programs in the subconscious mind, which mind do you think is going to win out? I bet you know. You can repeat the positive affirmation that you are a lovable person over and over and over, or that your cancer tumor will shrink, but if as a child you repeatedly heard that you are worthless and sickly, those messages that are programmed in your subconscious mind will undermine your best conscious efforts to change your life. Remember how quickly your last year's New Year's resolution to, let's say, eat less food fell by the wayside as the aroma of the baking turkey dissolved your resolve? Yeah, that's where that comes from. I believe the greatest problem we face is that we think we're running our lives with wishes, desires, and aspirations that were created by our conscious mind. That's simply not the case. We are struggling and we fail to obtain our goals, and we generally lead to conclude that we're victims of the outside forces that prevent us from reaching our destination. But that's also not the case. However, neuroscience has now established the conscious mind runs the show, and at best, only 5% of the time. It turns out programs acquired by the subconscious mind shape 95% of our life experiences. So that's why when you try to make conscious decisions, sometimes the subconscious mind overrides the conscious mind and you go back to habitual behavior, which is ultimately what leads to your physical consequences or life consequences. So let's review what we know about cells. We learned in earlier chapters that the functions of cells are directly derived from the movement of the proteins, and the proteins, quote, gears. The movement generated by assemblies of proteins provides the physiologic functions that enable life. While proteins are the physical building blocks, complementary environmental signals are required to animate their movement. Remember that. It's not just the protein itself or the genes. Very important. The interface between environmental signals and behavior producing cytoplasmic proteins is the cell's membrane. The membrane receives stimuli and then it engages the appropriate life-sustaining cell responses. The cell membrane operates as the cell's brain. Integral membrane proteins are fundamental physical subunits of the cell's, quote, brain intelligence mechanism. By functional definition, the protein complexes are essentially perception switches. As soon as they get an environmental signal, they switch into the form that is appropriate to that signal and hence create the signal and bring it into the cell. The link reception of the environment, that links the reception of the environment to the response generating protein pathways. So cells generally respond to an assortment of very basic perceptions of what's going on in the world. Such perceptions include things like potassium, calcium, oxygen, glucose, histamine, estrogen, toxins, light, and any number of other stimuli that are present in our immediate environment. The simultaneous interactions of tens of thousands of reflexive perception switches in the membrane, which each directly read an individual environmental signal, they collectively create the complex behavior of that living cell. Pretty interesting, huh? However, when cells come together in a community, a new politic has to be established, as opposed to just one signal cell reacting to its environment. Let's get into a complex collection of cells, because that's what we are. In a community, each cell cannot act as an independent agent, and it can't do whatever it wants. The term community implies all of its members commit to a common plan of action. So in multicellular animals like we are, individual cells may see the local environment outside of their own, quote, skin or membrane, but they have no awareness of what's going on in more distant environments, especially those outside of the whole organism itself. Can a liver cell buried in your viscera responding to its local environmental signals make an informed response regarding the consequence of a mugger that jumps into your environment? No, it can't. The complex behavior controls needed to ensure a multicellular organization's survival is incorporated within its centralized information processing system, which is where? The brain. As more complex animals evolve, specialized cells now take over the job of monitoring and organizing the flow and behavior regulating signal molecules. These cells provide a distributed nerve network and central information processor, a brain. The brain's function is to coordinate the dialogue of signal molecules within the community. Consequently, in a community of cells, each cell must relinquish control to the informed decision of its awareness authority, the brain. So the brain controls the behavior of the body's cells. This is very important to consider when we blame the cells of our organisms and tissues for the health issues we experience in our lives, right? We're giving those cells all of the responsibility in malfunctioning or dysfunctioning as leading to us becoming sick or sickly in some way or another. However, where does it start? It starts from the brain. And it's the brain's job to identify signals and send them to the appropriate cell systems or organs such that they can respond to that perception or that environmental signal. So again, this is telling you more and more how your perception of your environment has an impact on how your cells behave. Thus, how you receive information from your brain, and more commonly or more importantly, your subconscious mind, if it's constantly sending that similar signal to the cell over and over again, it could potentially be a, quote, bad signal or a destructive signal that could lead to disease or malfunction. Very important. Mind over body. Very connected, isn't it? I know we got a lot more to go in this chapter. It's quite a long chapter, so I'm just going to break it up for us like I just did, and we're going to get back to it hopefully next week. Otherwise, I'll do another book. I'll do metaphysical anatomy. We'll just keep going. I hope you guys got a lot of information out of this particular part of the chapter. I really love doing this, so thanks for watching, you guys, and please keep me informed with your feedback and how you feel about everything. Love you all. Take care.